Dana Yule was born on January 28 in 1971. His parents were Dale and Glee Yule. Dale and Glee grew up in Ohio during the Depression. The couple married in 1961 and had been married for 31 years. Both were very hard workers, and their upbringings during the Depression fueled their success. Dale Yule, age 59, was a United States Air Force veteran who went on to start his own successful business selling small airplanes. The company, Western Piper Sales Incorporated, made him a multi-millionaire. He was known to land on a farmer's field uninvited, charm the farmer into purchasing the plane, then teach the farmer how to fly it. Glee Yule, age 57, worked in public service. At one time she worked as a translator for the CIA. She also held a seat at the State Bar of California's committee where she helped evaluate who was to be seated as a judge. She was a former teacher, and an activist in the Fresno area. She was involved with assisting the Valley Children's Hospital, the Civil Service Commission, Country Grand Jury, museums, and many other charities. His parents both had large investments in local farmland and the stock market. The family lived modestly even though they were extremely wealthy. They did not announce their wealth with a fancy home or lavish spending. They carefully guarded their privacy. Dana Yule graduated from San Joaquin Memorial High School in 1989. He was about to graduate as a finance major at the University of Santa Clara. He had one sibling, an older sister, 24-year-old Tiffany Ann. She was a graduate student. The family lived at their upper-middle-class home, in Sunnyside, California, a small bedroom community in San Joaquin Valley, just 5 miles from Fresno. While Dana attended college, he posed as a wealthy entrepreneur, even though it was actually his father's accomplishments he boasted about. The local paper and the University of Santa Clara depicted stories of him being a successful self-made millionaire, not realizing it was untrue. He claimed he owned a company that grossed $2.7 million annually. He also boasted of playing the stock market in high school and becoming a stockbroker at the age of 18, as well as an aircraft salesman, and owning his own aircraft company. Dana had very expensive taste in clothes and cars. He drove a gold Mercedes-Benz. When he totaled his car, his father purchased him another one just like it. Even though the family lived modestly, Dale made sure his children had everything they wanted or needed. But this never seemed to satisfy their son. While attending college, he wore designer suits and carried a briefcase. His parents grew tired of his constant lies and deception. The article in the newspaper particularly angered Dana's father. They decided to modify their wills. Originally Dana would receive his inheritance at 21, but due to his behavior they increased it to the age of 35. Dana did not know about the change. The couple also planned to end their financial support of their son after his graduation. On April 19 in 1992, the Yule family spent Easter weekend at their vacation home in Pajaro Dunes, a coastal development outside Watsonville. On that Saturday the Yules entertained their son Dana, his girlfriend, Monica Zent, and her parents at their vacation home. Monica's father, John Zent, was an FBI agent. Dana went on to spend the rest of the weekend at his girlfriend's home. On that Sunday, Glee and Tiffany drove back to their home in Fresno while Dale used his private airplane to return home. Dale had a deep fear that the entire family would be killed in an accident, so he always insisted that the family travel separately. Glee and Tiffany arrived home ahead of Dale and entered first. Glee was shot 4 times in the den, while Tiffany was shot once in the kitchen. 30 minutes later Dale returned home and was shot once as he entered the residence holding a newspaper. He was shot from behind. Dana had phoned numerous family members telling them he could not reach his family. Around the same time the Yule's housekeeper, Juanita Evita, arrived at the Yule home for work. When she entered the kitchen, she found Tiffany lying in a pool of blood, face down. She immediately called 911. The murders were investigated by Fresno County Sheriff's Office homicide detectives John Souza and Chris Cotis. The detectives believed that someone hid in the home until the family arrived, then shot them as they entered the home. It was believed that the crime was planned. The perpetrator took the shell casings as they left the scene. Police believe the murderer was familiar with guns as they shot multiple times and missed only once. There was no signs of forced entry at the Yule home. During the search of the home, police discovered a box of 9mm shells which were later determined to be purchased by Dale a couple of years before the murders. Police believe these bullets were used in the murders. The bullets pulled from the victims showed evidence of a homemade silencer being used. Police believe the scene was staged to show the appearance of an attempted robbery to throw off their investigation, but nothing of value was taken. 2 days after the murders, a memorial service was held for Dale, Glee and Tiffany at the First Congregational Church in Fresno, California. Over 400 people attended, including several detectives. The detectives watched the service for any odd behavior. At the service, Dana showed up with his uncles, their wives and their children. After the service, Dana didn't show any grief at all, and when he noticed a female friend with a huge ring on her finger, he yelled, "What a rock!" Detectives found this strange, that he showed more animation over a ring than the death of his own family. Dana posted a $50,000 reward for information leading to the arrest of the murderer. Police worked extensively on locating a possible suspect, including checking the backgrounds of all victims, looking for anyone that possibly would want the family dead. They discovered before Dale took over the airplane business, he sold airplanes for a man named Frank Lamb, who was later convicted of drug smuggling. They also discovered that Dale had been involved in a real estate development deal with his brother, which nearly fell through. However, after investigating both leads thoroughly, police ruled both suspects out. Police quickly noticed Dana's unusual behavior. He did not grieve like someone who just lost their entire family. Police began to focus on Dana even though he had an alibi for part of the weekend with being at his girlfriend's house in San Francisco, over 200 miles away. Dana also kept a receipt for some candy he purchased from a grocery store with his American Express card around the time of the murders. He gave this to detectives believing it would exonerate him. When police interviewed family and friends, they told authorities that after his parents and sister died, Dana was laser-focused on the details of his parents' will. And when he learned that he was unable to gain access to his family's money until he was in his 30s, he became extremely angry. Dale's 3 brothers fought against their nephew Dana to keep his hands out of Dale's money. His parents' estate was under a legal trust that locked up most of their assets after death. A trustee was required to pay for Dana's expenses until he turned 25. Then from 25 to 30 he would receive dividends from his parents' investments, but no access to the principal. He would receive half of the principal at the age of 30, and the rest at the age of 35. And with his father's brothers fighting him to obtain any of the money, he had to look at other ways to pay for his extravagant lifestyle. He was the full beneficiary of over $300,000 in life insurance, which was not under any trust, so he received the full payment without any restrictions. Dana's college friend, Joel Patrick Radofsich, abruptly dropped out of college right after the murders. He was obsessed with guns and explosives. Joel Radofsich was introverted and shy and the opposite of his friend, Dana. He was fascinated with Dana's wealthy lifestyle and how easily he could get girls. He was addicted to drugs and obsessed with video games. His friendship with Dana gave him access to parties and girls. Just weeks after the murders, Dana moved his friend, Radofsich, into the family home with him. The two were purchasing things such as helicopter flight lessons and an airplane despite neither having a job. He also put his mother's fur coat up for sale in the local newspaper. The two were also using complex communication systems, such as pagers and pay telephone calls, to avoid detection. Investigators spent 3 years gathering evidence and keeping the pair under surveillance. During that time, forensic analysis revealed the murder weapon was a high-end 9mm special rifle made by Feather Industries in Trinidad, Colorado. When records were pulled, it was discovered that the gun was purchased by Ernest Jack Ponce, a close friend of the Radovčić family, just days before the murders. When interviewed, Ponce admitted that he purchased the rifle for Joel Radovčić, but said he had no idea it was going to be used for a crime. To add to more complications, Dana Yule's grandfather died in a basement explosion in his home in Ohio, which fire officials attributed to an unsafe gas generator. In the early months of 1995, Dana Yule and Joel Patrick Radovčić were both arrested. After their arrest, it was discovered that after the murders, Dana Yule became the executor of his living grandmother's estate, which held $400,000 in a trust account. The account was set up in the 1970s for Glee Yule's mother, who is 93 at the time of Dana taking control of the trust, and she was living in a rest home. Dana pushed for the nursing home to move his grandmother into a room with a door to the outside. When police began suspecting he murdered his family, they asked the staff at her nursing home to stop allowing him to take his grandmother outside of the facility. They believed he was showing interest in her for foul reasons. They believed he wanted to murder her to keep from paying the nursing home so he could have her money all for himself. Under the control of Dana, the $400,000 trust dwindled to $2,000. Dana used the money for lavish spending on himself, his friend Radovčić, and his girlfriend, Monica Zent. Quite a bit of the money was distributed to 25 accounts spread out in 14 different banks. Some of the accounts were in Dana's name, while others were jointly held with his grandmother or girlfriend. Superior Court Judge Frank J. Creed, Jr. banned television cameras from the trial, but did allow a radio station to cover court proceedings. The court case was a sensational affair due to the nature of the crime, its wealthy suspects, and the fact that it had taken so long to bring the criminals to justice. Fresno County District Attorneys James Opliger and Jeffrey Hammerschmidt led the prosecution team against Yule and Radovčić. The trial lasted several months. Prosecutors argued that Dana Yule wanted his parents' fortune and driven by greed, and he promised Radovčić a share of his family's wealth. The two defendants were represented by separate attorneys. Both took a different strategy. Yule's lawyer claimed his client was innocent of all charges, while Radovčić's lawyer believed his client was guilty and only wanted to avoid a death sentence. Because Ponce concealed evidence after a crime was committed, he was considered an accessory after the fact. However, he was granted immunity from prosecution if he agreed to testify against Yule and Radovčić. Ponce testified Joel acted as the trigger man for Dana. He said Dana did not want to wait on his inheritance, and did not want to share it with his sister. He told the court that Joel shaved his entire body from the top of his head to his feet except for his eyebrows, so no hair evidence could be left behind, and waited for 12 hours. He sat on a plastic sheet to keep any evidence from being found. He said Tiffany was the first to die. She walked by Joel, not noticing him, and he shot her in the back of the head as she walked by. She never noticed him. Glee spotted Joel, and tried to make a run for the door, but he caught up to her, and shot her 3 more times while standing over her. He said she looked Joel in the eyes as he shot her multiple times. She knew him since he had stayed at their home just a month prior. After killing Glee and Tiffany, he put a new magazine in his rifle and waited on Dale to get home. He slipped up on Dale and shot him in the back of the head from behind. He checked to make sure none of the victims had a pulse, then waited until dark to slip out of the house. He said Joel told him that he hoped there was no God, because if there is, I'm screwed. From what Ponce told authorities, they were able to retrieve the gun barrel from where Ponce had buried it in a vacant lot in Rosetta. A test showed that it matched the bullets used in the murders. The jury deliberated for 11 days, delivering guilty verdicts on 3 counts of first-degree murder. Both were subject to stricter penalties due to aggravating circumstances: multiple victims, murder for profit, and lying in wait. Both were facing the death sentence, but somehow were spared. They were both sentenced on July 20 in 1998 to life sentences without the possibility of parole. Both have exhausted their appeals and will spend the rest of their lives behind bars. The 12 people who found both men guilty of the murders have rarely spoken about the case. But now, jury foreman Mike Elder says the jurors could sense Dana Yule was an evil man. He said Dana actually scared people, Elder said. They would look over at him, and he had this look on his face. You just thought any minute these horns were going to come up. Elders said that although they believed Joel Radofsich was the murderer, jurors sympathized with him. They believed Dana took a broken man and used him. And although prosecutors couldn't prove that Dana Yule and Joel Radofsich murdered Dana's grandfather in Ohio, they firmly believe Joel also carried out that murder for Dana as well. The prosecutor said, his grandfather ended up dying as a result of an explosion in the basement, and there was evidence that Joel Radofsich was in Ohio around that same time. They also believed he planned to kill his grandmother, but there was not enough evidence to prove that either. Dana Yule is currently at the California State Prison. He is in the same prison as Rodney Alcala, the dating game killer, Philip Garrido, J.C. Dugard's kidnapper, and Michael Markasev, murderer of Bill Cosby's son. Joel Radofsich is housed at the Mule Creek State Prison, which is located about 2 hours south of San Francisco. Dana Yule was born into a loving, secure family with advantages most only dream about. He wasn't thankful, nor did he use those advantages to establish his own place in the world. Instead, he wanted everything now, and he didn't want to share it. He orchestrated the murders of his father, mother and sister without a second thought. It's also suspected that he had his grandfather murdered, and was planning to murder his grandmother. He was a selfish, greedy psychopathic monster who deserves to spend the rest of his life behind bars. May his victims rest in peace. That concludes this episode. Keep your eye out for the next volume, coming soon. If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing. Thanks for watching.
Want to help support the channel you love, and get something in return? Simply purchase some Elizabeth's Chronicles merch. We have coffee mugs, t-shirts, sweatshirts, cozy blankets, beach towels, phone covers and more. Use the coupon code EC10OFF4U and get 10% off your order. The link to order is in the description area below this video. Thanks for helping Elizabeth's Chronicles continue to make the videos you love.